guys, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. We're back today with another canning meals in jars video. Today is our beef edition. So we're going to be doing 5 different recipes today. They all need to pressure can for 90 minutes because that's the time that beef needs to can for. So it's totally fine for us to mix and match all of these different recipes into one canner load. Now I want to chat really quick about what type of beef I'm using and how much. So I bought 2 chuck roasts. One was 1.89 pounds and the other was 2.5 pounds for a total of 4.39 pounds. Now all of these meal and jar recipes call for approximately 1 pound of beef per jar. If you cut up your beef into about approximately 2-inch cubes, you're going to get an average of 2 cups of that cubed beef is going to be about a pound. So when I personally am canning meals in jars and the recipe calls for a pound, I just write down 2 cups because that is generally going to be what it is going to come out to. Now I have 4.39 pounds that I need to fit and make stretch for 5 jars. So all of these recipes, you can just mark her down. It is 2 cups of beef, but you will probably see me use slightly less than 2 full cups of beef, just simply because I'm trying to make what I bought stretch for all 5 jars. But if you want to do the exact what the recipe says, it's going to be 1 pound, which is approximately 2 cups of cubed beef. Okay, let's get started. In case you haven't heard, we have a Meals in Jars canning cookbook coming soon, and in the description box of this video you will find a link to the landing page for that. You can sign up on the wait list to be notified of its release, and when you do, you'll be automatically entered into our giveaway where we will choose one winner to win a free copy of the cookbook. If you're watching this video at a later date, it's possible the cookbook is already available. If that's the case, you'll be able to access that book in the same link in that same description box. If you're new here, we invite you to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming tutorials on canning, cooking, food storage, and gardening. Our first recipe is going to be a beef stroganoff in a jar, and we're going to start with our 2 cups of beef. Like I said, I'm going to go just a little bit light on the beef. Let me show you about the size of the cubes that I'm using. Like I said, about 2-inch cubes. One cup. So beef stroganoff, as you probably know, has mushrooms in it. I don't like canning with mushrooms. I don't think they taste very good in canned, and I just prefer to use our dehydrated or our freeze-dried mushrooms and add them, not in the jar, but add them when I go to cook them. So the recipe calls for 1/2 cup of mushrooms. If you would like to put those in, absolutely do that. I will be not putting them in and adding them when I go to make up this dish fresh. And stay tuned for that. That video will be coming up, and we will show you how to cook all of these meals. Well, we're going to give you ideas. You can cook them however you want, of course, but we're going to give you 5 ideas for how to turn these jars into complete meals to feed several people. Okay, so we're going to skip the mushrooms. So that leaves us with, we're going to move on to 1/2 cup of onions. You can use whatever type of onions that you want. These are yellow onions. Whoops, I made a mess. Okay, 1/2 cup of chopped onions. And next, we're going to do 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. Okay, I've already put 1 tablespoon of tomato paste in, and here's the other tablespoon of tomato paste. Okay, next we need a teaspoon of salt. Anytime you're canning, always use salt that isn't iodized and doesn't have any anti-caking agents in it. Next is 1/2 teaspoon of pepper. Followed by 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. Take that lid completely off. 2 tablespoons. Next, we need a teaspoon of thyme. I only have ground thyme, so I'm going to use 1/2 teaspoon of ground thyme because it is far more potent than its whole form. Anything ground is going to be more potent than its whole form. So if you were using whole thyme, put a teaspoon. I'm using ground thyme, so I'm going to use 1/2 teaspoon. Next is a teaspoon of parsley. Need to crush it up a little bit. This is our freeze-dried parsley from the garden. This is one reason why we grow a lot of parsley in our garden, because we use it a ton in our cooking and our canning recipes. And last but not least, a teaspoon of minced garlic. You can do, that would be about a clove if you were using fresh garlic. I'm using already minced garlic, so I'm going to do 1 teaspoon. But you could totally just crush up 1 clove of garlic. Okay, at this point, we are done with all of our ingredients except for filling it up to 1 inch headspace with liquid. With all of these ingredients, you can top them all off with just plain water, or you can use beef broth. You could use chicken broth if you wanted to, but since these are beef-based recipes, I do recommend sticking to either water or beef broth. I don't have any beef broth made up, and I do want to add a little bit more flavor than what is naturally going to be produced in these jars. So I'm going to be using my favorite Orrington Farms beef broth powder. I'm going to put just 1 tablespoon of that in, and my tablespoon is really dirty, so let me grab another one. So I'm going to put just 1 tablespoon of that in. Here's what it looks like. And then top it off with water, and as I pour the water into the jar, it's going to basically produce that beef broth. And we need to fill up these jars to 1 inch headspace. Anytime I'm canning with meat, I give myself a little bit of extra space, more like 1 1/4 inch is what I go for. And it looks like that's about it, but let me debubble and see if I need to adjust my headspace. Every now and then after we debubble, we need to adjust our headspace because the food kind of settles sometimes, just in case anyone's brand new to canning. But it looks like we are good to go. So 1 inch headspace, for those who are brand new, is going to be right here at the neck of the jar. So 1 1/4 inch is going to be just a little bit slightly less. So I'm going to wipe my rims. That's the next step in any canning process after debubbling, is wiping the rims. Then a new clean lid. Just off camera over here, I have my lids in some warm water. You see that they're wet. And I have my stovetop on the melt setting, so it's like the absolute lowest heat possible for those lids. And then a ring to fingertip tight, and it's ready to go into the canner. Next recipe is a beef pot roast in a jar. I went ahead and just kind of rinsed some of my utensils just because I don't want a bunch of flavors from one jar mixing into the flavor of another jar. And one thing I wanted to note is when you are canning meals in jars, you do want to use wide mouth jars because it is a whole lot easier to get big chunks of meat out of this jar than it is out of the regular mouth jar. But in this particular canner, the Presto Digital Canner, it will only hold 5 quart jars if 2 of them are wide mouth and 3 of them are regular. So I have to use 3 regular in order for me to fit all 5 recipes into this canner, but I just wanted to note that it is much easier to get it out of a wide mouth jar. Okay, so beef pot roast in a jar. We're going to again start with our 1 pound of beef, which again is 2 cups, and I'm going to do less than 2 cups just to stretch my meat. When you are canning recipes like this, it is absolutely okay to use less meat than what it's called for. That's not an issue at all. Get in there. Where's my debubble tool? There it is. Okay. And to that, we're going to add 1/2 cup of cooking wine, red wine. You can use white wine if you prefer. This is not something that I would typically cook with, but for these meals in jars, I am doing it because meals in jars, if they're not really done right or flavored well, they can be lacking flavor. And the red wine, cooking wine, is going to be really key to making this beef pot roast absolutely melt in your mouth, delicious and tender. So I'm going to do 1/2 cup of this red cooking wine. I just picked it up from Walmart. I'm not sure what the brand is. Let me see what the brand is. Holland House. Holland House. I've been using it for all of these meals and jars, and it's been turning out pretty good. Although I don't really have anything to compare it to, but okay. So next is going to be 1 teaspoon of salt. 1 teaspoon of salt. Followed by 1/2 teaspoon of pepper. Followed by a teaspoon of thyme. Again, I'm going to be using half a teaspoon of thyme since I have the ground version. If you're using whole, bump it up to a teaspoon. And that we will need 1 teaspoon of our minced garlic. Again, you can absolutely just use 1 fresh garlic clove. You could even use garlic powder if you don't have any fresh garlic or minced garlic. And to that, we're going to start adding some vegetables. We're going to do 1 cup of diced carrots. Anytime you are canning with vegetables that are root crops, especially, they need to be peeled. So these are peeled and chopped carrots. And just a note, at the time of filming, there is a recall on all organic carrots from a certain store or farm out in California, and they supply most of the organic carrots in like the most popular stores like Kroger and Walmart and Whole Foods and stuff like that. So just a note about that. So I did purchase non-organic for this recipe because we are in the middle of that organic carrot recall. If you have not heard about that, just be sure to look it up, and so that you can check your dates, check your labels, and see if you might be affected. So 1 cup of peeled and diced carrots. And to that, we're going to add half a cup of, again, peeled and diced potatoes. Half a cup. And to that, we'll add a 1/4 cup of celery. Can't remember if I already measured this out or not. Looks like I got a little bit more. Okay, so a 1/4 cup of diced celery. I'm going to use my debubble tool to push some things down real quick. Open up some room because we still need some onions. Okay, to that we're going to add a half a cup of diced onions. I'm losing my cups here. There it is. Half a cup of diced onions. I've used red onions before when making pot roast, and it's really good. But again, these are yellow onions. You can use whatever kind you like. And I believe that is it. I think all we need to do is top it off. Yep. Okay, so I am going to do 1 tablespoon of that beef broth powder. Again, just to add some incredible flavor to this dish. But you can simply just top it off with water if you prefer. Okay, fill with water to 1-inch headspace. But again, because it has the meat in it, I'm going to give myself a little bit extra headspace. About 1 1/4 inch. Debubble. Let's check our headspace, make sure it's good. We're good. Going to wipe my rim, followed by a new clean lid. And wring to fingertip tight, which means to the point of resistance and just a quarter turn more. And into the canner, this beef pot roast goes. That is gorgeous. I love the way canned food looks. Okay, next is an Italian beef, and oh, y'all, this is probably, I don't know if I can say my all-time favorite, but it is one of my absolute favorite beef canning recipes because it uses pepperoncinis. And I go ahead and add in some pepperoncini juice. I'm trying to see how I'm doing on meat here. Let's see, we were on our 3rd recipe, so I've got 2 more. Here's how I'm looking on meat. I'm looking pretty good on meat. I think I'm going to add a little bit more. Okay, so basically a pound of meat, which is approximately 2 cups of meat. So to this, we're going to add our peppers, and I'm going to do 1 cup, half cup to 1 cup. You have some wiggle room here. If you absolutely love the flavor of pepperoncinis like we do, then go ahead and do a full cup. If they're a little bit too spicy for you, or you just don't love the flavor, you can go more of the half cup range. I'm going to dump those all in there. Then I'm going to do 2 teaspoons of minced garlic. That would be about 2 cloves of fresh garlic. 1 and 2. I'm just going to do the rest in here. because it's not much. Next ingredient is a dry Italian seasoning mix. I'm going to be using 2 teaspoons of this dry Italian, not Italian seasoning mix, I'm sorry, Italian salad dressing mix. There's a big difference in those two things. So Italian salad dressing mix, I'm going to use 2 teaspoons of that. 1 and 2. And then what I'm going to do is, I've got my jar of pepperoncinis here, and it's got some extra juice, you know, in it. And I want the juice, I want about a tablespoon of pepperoni juice to go into my jar. So I'm going to try to pour some juice in here without pouring any more pepperoncinis in. But if a couple fall in, that's okay. So I'm going for about a tablespoon. But this measurement doesn't need to be exact. This is not going to be anything, it's not a safety issue, it's not anything like that you have to worry about. It's essentially just a seasoning. So you can go higher or lower on that. Okay, that is going to be it. So for this particular recipe, I really want the flavors of the pepperoncinis, the pepperoni juice, and that dry Italian salad dressing mix. I really want those flavors to be the highlight of this dish. So I'm not going to add any beef broth powder. I'm just going to top this one off with water. I'm kind of looking at it and seeing that it doesn't have a lot of meat in it. You know what? I'm doing pretty good on meat. We only have 2 more meals to do. So I'm going to add a little bit more meat to this jar, since that's all it is. It doesn't have any vegetables in it. It is just our pepperoni and seasonings. And I'm not going to be able to make it stretch as far if it doesn't have that much meat in it. Okay, I'm much happier with that. Okay, so I'm going to top this off, excuse me, to 1-inch headspace, 1 1/4 inch. With just water. I am foregoing the beef broth powder. And I'm actually doing a little bit less water on this one. Y'all have been asking some excellent questions. And one of those questions is, why am I adding water to these meals in jars when it is mostly meat, raw meat? When we are canning raw meat, if I was to do a quart jar of just cubed beef, I would not add any water. And that's because when you're cooking or canning with raw meat, it will produce its own liquid. It will produce its own, you know, broth as it goes through the canning process. And so we don't add water. Now, when we're canning with cooked meat, we do add water. So why am I adding water to these meals in jars when I'm using a lot of raw meat? And that's because the recipes, the tested recipes that I have been following, some of these I have tweaked to fit our family's liking, although all of the tweaks that I make are safe and according to safe canning guidelines. But some of them are just straight from the recipe, and they call for water. And I'm not 100% sure why that is. The only thing I can think is that almost all of these meals have several other ingredients in them, including raw chopped vegetables. And I think it's probably because of those raw chopped vegetables are going to be absorbing some of that liquid, and just the simple fact that we need liquid in the jar when we are canning vegetables for safety reasons. So I think because it's mixed like that, it still calls for water. Now for this one, all we have is the pepperoncinis in addition to our beef. So this one is like really close to being solely beef. So you can see that I am leaving about 1.5 inches of headspace, almost 2 inches of headspace on this one. 1 inch would be up here, 1 1/4 inch would be about here. So yeah, I'm about 1.5 inches down here. And that is because I know that this raw beef is going to be producing some water during the canning process. So I wanted to just address that because I'm sure someone might ask, and I hope that helps. Okay, so excuse me, I'm going to wipe my rims. New clean lid and ring to fingertip tight. And into the canner we go. Here's how that looks. This is an Italian beef. I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to use this, so I'll have to think about it. Next recipe is a beef pot pie filling. So I'm going to use 2 cups of beef. And I only have one other jar, one other meal to make, so I'm basically going to split what is left. And it looks like it's right at 2 cups per jar, right what it's supposed to be. So that's excellent. Okay, we have our 2 cups of cubed beef. We're going to follow that up with 1 cup of chopped carrots. And I can tell this is a pint jar, so that's going to be half filled. It's going to be about a cup. So 1 cup of peeled chopped carrots. We're going to follow that with 1/3 cup of peas. 1/3 cup of peas. These were frozen peas that I allowed to thaw and come to room temperature before using. Anytime you're going to be canning, you can use frozen ingredients. They just need to be room temperature before you put them inside your jars. Next, we're going to do 1/2 cup of chopped onion. 1/2 cup of chopped onion. Now, normally a beef pot pie filling, and this recipe is going to be calling for 1 cup of cubed potatoes. I'm not going to do 1 cup of cubed potatoes in this jar today because I think I might serve this over mashed potatoes instead of making a pot pie. I'm trying to give y'all some meal ideas that really stretch these meals in jars to feed multiple people. And I think I can get more bang for my buck if I mix this with a little roux and serve it over either baked potatoes or mashed potatoes, almost like more of a shepherd's pie type thing is probably what we're going to do. So because of that, I'm going to leave out the potatoes in the jar. But if you would like them, you can add 1/2 cup to 1 cup of peeled cubed potatoes. Okay, next we're going to add our seasonings. We need a 1/4 teaspoon of thyme. And I am going to go ahead and do the full 1/4 teaspoon of thyme, even though I'm using ground thyme here because that's a really strong flavor in pot pie. Okay, next we're going to do a teaspoon of garlic powder. Garlic powder. Someone asked recently, how do I decide when to use fresh minced garlic versus garlic powder? And it's just a choice. It can be personal preference, just what you have on hand. It really doesn't matter. It's not a safety thing. You can absolutely use garlic powder or fresh garlic. So I'm going to be using a teaspoon of garlic powder, followed by 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And then follow that with a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. And for this beef pot pie filling, when I know I'm going to be adding a roux to this to make it nice and thick, I really want it to have a beefy, saucy roux that it's in. So I am going to be adding a heaping tablespoon of the beef broth powder. A heaping tablespoon of beef broth powder. Let me review my recipe one more time, make sure I did not miss anything other than the potatoes. We're leaving those out. Nope. Okay, so now we are ready to top with water to 1 1/4 inch head space. I love the way that pot pie fillings look in the jar. I make this with chicken and venison. I don't typically do beef just because we really don't buy beef. We use our venison in place of beef, but I just absolutely love, it's one of my favorite jars to sit on the shelf. It's so pretty. Okay, so after debubbling, we can wipe our rims. I've got a big smudge of something right there. I'm going to dig that out real quick. Just because when we are pressure canning, siphoning just happens sometimes. Siphoning is when you lose liquid during the canning process, and sometimes it's just unavoidable. And if there's like a big chunk of food right on the inside of the jar, it was like right there, it wasn't on the rim, but if I have any siphoning at all, it's going to carry that big chunk of food like up and out of the jar and could prevent even further, further decrease my chances of getting a good seal. So just a tip there. Okay, I've got my lid on and ring to fingertip tight, and into the canner it goes. Last but not least, we have a Mexican beef. This is something that could be like a shredded beef on tacos, quesadillas, burritos, anything like that. I'm not 100% sure which one I'll do, but it will certainly be like a Tex-Mex style dish. So again, we're going to go a pound of cubed beef, which is approximately 2 cups. This is my last one. So I'm going to use everything that I have left, which looks like it's going to be about 2.5 cups. And that is going to be fine because this recipe doesn't have much vegetables in it. In fact, the only thing it has other than seasonings is onions and peppers. So we need 1/2 cup of chopped peppers. If you like your Tex-Mex food spicy, you can absolutely swap this out for jalapenos. We prefer just to do bell peppers. And then 1/4 cup of onions. And I'm just going to use what I have left in here. That is about 1/4 cup. And then just our seasonings. So we need 1/2 teaspoon of cumin. 1/2 teaspoon of cumin. In the description box below, I will link for y'all where I get all of my bulk seasonings. And then 1/2 teaspoon of oregano, although we are just going to use our Italian blend because that's what we stock. We don't buy the original or the like specific individual ingredients for Italian seasoning blend. We just buy Italian seasoning blend in bulk, and that's what we use anytime an Italian herb is mentioned. To that, we're going to add 1/2 teaspoon of smoked paprika. It doesn't have to be smoked. You can use regular paprika if you prefer it. 1/2 teaspoon of that, followed by 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And a teaspoon of garlic powder. Again, you can use fresh garlic if you want in this recipe, no problem. We're going to do 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. I'm going to do 1 tablespoon of my beef broth powder. And then, before we add our water, we are going to add a little bit of salsa. A little bit of salsa, about 1/2 cup to 1 cup. I'm going to pour out 1 cup and slowly pour it in and see how we're doing. There's 1 cup of salsa. Oh yeah, we'll have plenty of room because once I debubble, all of that's going to sink in nicely. I'm going to push this down just a little bit before I add some water. You can see how the salsa, I'm using the debubble tool to kind of push down so that that salsa is going down and reaching that beef. And then we will add our water to 1-inch headspace. Oh man, this one smells really good. Of course, I love Mexican food, so that's not very surprising. Okay, I'm going to debubble again. I have a feeling I'm going to really need to adjust my headspace on this one. Let's debubble and see where we're at. Okay, let's see. We're good. Okay, we don't need to adjust after all. So we're going to wipe our rims to get all anything that may have splashed up there, get it off there so it doesn't interfere with getting a good seal. Clean lid, new clean lid, and ring the fingertip tight. Another question I've been receiving is why am I not preheating my canner in my jars? And that's a great question, and that is because all of these meals are raw packed, meaning they're room temperature, they're not cooked, and when we are canning, everything needs to be approximately the same temperature. If you're raw packing food and all of it is cool to room temperature, you don't want to preheat your canner or your jars because you don't want that kind of cool food to go into a warm canner. But normally when we're canning, we would typically be bringing something to a boil or simmering it and something like that, and therefore it would need to go into warm jars in a warm canner. So I just wanted to mention that real quick. Let me get tidied up and we'll get this thing going. Okay, I mentioned that all of these recipes contain beef, so they all need to pressure can for 90 minutes. So I'm going to select the pressure can setting, select 90 minutes. It says insert jars. I've already inserted them. I'm going to close my lid. If you would like a full, complete, step-by-step tutorial on how to use this specific canner, I will link the canning shredded chicken video below, because that's the one where I really go through and take you step by step. We will bring you back when this is done and show you what each of the jars look like. Okay, the jars are ready to come out of the canner. Here is our beef pot pie, and y'all, I did it again. I forgot to label my jars before they went into the canner. Oh goodness. One of these days I will get into the habit of doing that. So I'm gonna have to figure out what these are. This one's a mystery for now. Let's see. That is our pot roast, I think. The pot roast had a lot of carrots in it. This one's our Mexican one, because it had peppers. I remember that one. I had major siphoning. I bet that one's not going to. Okay, this is a great example. Let me bring you in a little bit closer real quick. Okay, just a quick tip. You see how these jars are all still bubbling? Still bubbling, still bubbling, not bubbling at all. Even though this is just out of the canner for about 30 seconds, I know for sure that this jar is not going to seal. And even if it did seal, I wouldn't feel confident in it, and I would put it straight in the fridge. So once these come to room temperature, this is going straight into the fridge because I'm confident it won't seal, and even if it does, I'm not comfortable with that seal. You can see that all these other jars are still bubbling, and that's a sign of a good, solid seal if your jar is still bubbling when it comes out of the canner. Just wanted to show you that since it presented itself to give you a compare and contrast between the two different jars. Okay, one more jar to take out. Okay, last but not least is our Italian beef, because I see those pepperoncinis there. See, and you can see it's nice and bubbly, so that is good and sealed. So we have our Italian beef with the pepperoncinis, our Mexican beef for tacos and things like that, pot roast in a jar, our, what is that? That's our beef pot pie filling. I'm flipping through my recipes here to see if figure out which one it is. Pro tip, label your jars. Don't be like me. Label your jars first. Oh, beef stroganoff. Okay, beef pot pie, beef stroganoff, pot roast in a jar, Mexican beef, Italian beef. There we go. Stay tuned for the next video coming up shortly. We will show you how we turn each of these jars into a complete meal for 4 to 5 people. That's all for today. We'll see you next time. Bye.